Hi, everybody. You can hear me, right? Good, because I can hear myself. So, I am so sorry for what just happened. Can you?
I will. Just keep talking.
Oh, it's weird because I'm listening. I'm hearing my own voice, so
fixing
it's really weird. We never had this problem before. I can deal with it.
Okay.
Yeah, bye. Thank you, EJ. It was EJ that helped me. I never had this problem before. Suddenly the StreamYard just doesn't take the audio signal from my vmix, and we never had this problem before. I extremely apologize for this, and I'm so sorry for that too. I have to our guests have to wait, but I'm very excited for about my stream today. And shout out to the international magazine that it was the comrades from international magazine that connect me connect me and the special guest today. And today we're gonna talk about philosophy, Marxism, and bourgeois philosophy, and what's the difference between that. And let's welcome our guest today, Dr. Asatar Bair. Hi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, we don't hear
pleasure
you.
to be on your stream.
EJ, is that like... so EJ here. Okay, Dr. Asatar, please introduce yourself to the chat. Because I know that lots of people know about you already, but just in case somebody in the chat do not know about you yet, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Dr. Asatar Bair. I'm a professor of economics at Riverside City College in Southern California, and I am on YouTube as well. You can watch my lectures on political economy, or I also teach meditation if you're interested in that. And I'm active on Twitter, talking and teaching about communism, socialism, capitalism, and so on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Asatar Bair, for being here in my interview. And I'm very happy and I'm honored that I finally can have a chance to talk to you. And well, you know that most people in the chat know that I am Vietnamese, and I study Marxism, Leninism in Vietnam in my university. And I just finished translating the textbook of Marxism, Leninism of my university. And the thing that I've been having my channel for nearly 4 years now. And the problem that I see with, people in the West is that their understanding of Marxism, Leninism is very, I gotta say, different than what I've been studying in school in Vietnam. One of the biggest problems is that they do not really clearly understand the difference between dialectical materialism and idealism, or they can't even understand understand the difference between dialectical materialism and historical materialism, something like that. So in our stream today, I really, really, really hope to understand why is there that there's a problem like that in the West. And that's my comrade EJ have fixing the audio today. Shout out to my comrade EJ. Okay, so just for some basic understanding about what I studied in school, so you can know a little bit about it. What we Vietnamese students we study in school was the very basic principles of Marxism, Leninism, and we mostly just study from the three main great authors, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, for a year, and then after that, we will learn about Ho Chi Minh thought, which is literally the application of Marxism, Leninism into the material conditions of Vietnam. That is what we study in school. And as I said, the biggest problem that I see in the West right now is that you can't even really distinguish between Marxism, dialectical materialism, and idealism. And I did see a lot of quote unquote famous socialists on the internet, they use hypothetical, like really, really like the hypotheticals that doesn't have any connection with the material condition to prove their point. So can you please explain like what's going on and why did they act like that?
Yeah, but I want to ask a question first because I don't know that much about Vietnam, and I've certainly never studied there or gone to school there or anything, right? So my question is, would you say that people's understanding of dialectical materialism is like good on average? I mean, like when if you look at like an educated person, would you say like they have a good grasp on dialectical materialism?
Yes, I do believe that we do have a pretty good grasp on dialectical materialism. So we traditionally we have a saying. Yeah.
Is that because it's a long part of your education? Like you study that for years? Like is that the case?
It's coming from both out in tradition because like like Taoism is also a kind of materialism that is very famous in Asia, especially in countries like Vietnam and China. So there is a very famous Taoist quote that we've been saying for hundreds of years. In Vietnamese, this is có thực mới vực được đạo. It literally means you only can talk about philosophical stuff if your belly is full. Means that matter like defines consciousness, and you need to have a belly full of food before you can talk about all stuff like philosophical stuff like that. So this kind of very much aligned with our belief in our understanding of dialectical materialism. And yes, Vietnam, we have been having socialist education since the 50s.
Right.
Started from the north. And then when we won the Vietnam War in 1975, we taught that in all of the schools. And in 2008, the best philosophers, Marxist philosophers of Vietnam sit together. And based on the Marxism-Leninism curriculum from the USSR, we sit together and we came up with a very, very important curriculum books about the basic principles of Marxism-Leninism, where we literally learn about dialectical materialism, historical materialism, political economy, and then scientific socialism, like that. So I am confident to say that most of Vietnamese student like very have a good grasp of basic understanding of dialectical materialism.
That's great. I would love to go there and study this and see what see for myself, because I mean that is very, very different from the U.S. context, right? Where I would say like first of all, if we look at like Western philosophy. Now, let me just say before I get into this, I'm an outsider to philosophy. I'm an economist, right? So economists don't have to know anything about philosophy, right? I know it because I studied Marxism, right? So that's my angle on studying philosophy. I didn't really study it formally, but there's two major strands of contemporary philosophy, right? There's the analytical philosophy tradition and the continental philosophy tradition, and of those two, analytical philosophy is far more dominant, right? So, and analytical philosophy is pretty hostile to dialectics, right? In fact, Hegel's critique was of analytical philosophy, basically, right? Like formal logic. Hegel produced this massive work in philosophy that is part of this long tradition that criticizes formal logic, and Marx, of course, being a good student of philosophy and a student of this tradition, takes this, modifies it, adds the emphasis on the material conditions. Hegel, of course, had been far more idealistic, right? Hegel famously capitalizes, the idea, right? For example, right? A kind of example of like the focus that he puts on that, right? And Marx says, well, we need to kind of correct this, right? The material conditions are not being seen enough for their importance. Not that ideas aren't important. I mean, like, we don't want to create like a rigid determinism here, right? But we want to kind of, since the entire weight of the Western philosophical tradition is toward these metaphysical, essentialist, timeless constructs, right? I mean, that's the problem, right? So, like, I think if you ask me, like, why is dialectics or dialectical materialism, historical materialism, why is this poorly understood in the West? Well, we're trying to overcome thousands of years of the immense weight of the Western philosophical tradition. And, dialectical materialism, it represents a minority position, right? And so, that doesn't get as much support. People who study it don't get they don't get the funding, and there aren't as many professorships and whatever, right? Like, if you want to have a job as a philosopher, or as an academic philosopher, you better be good at analytical philosophy. And that kind of philosophy is very hostile toward dialectical materialism, in my view, right? Because this is it's like the mathematical kind of version of philosophy. That's my assessment of it, right? So it's, and especially then when you get into things like analytical Marxism, right? This is like taking analytical philosophy and saying, oh, well, let's apply that to Marxism. Let's fix the problems of Marxism. And it's like, you're ignoring what Marx and Engels and Hegel even, right, what they wrote. Like, there's a reason why they use this methodology. There's a reason why they focus on contradiction. There's and they write about their reasons, right? I mean, it's not some kind of mystery. Just read it, like if you want to know, you can disagree with them, right? You can say, well, that they were wrong or whatever, but like needs to be fixed. I mean, it's interwoven into the fabric of the theory, right? So, it's class seen as a contradictory totality, not seen as some kind of magical timeless essence, right? I mean, that's a very different perspective. And, Mao has the great summary of this, right, on contradiction. If people are interested, I have a reading of this. If people like, hearing my smooth voice, read the words of Mao, I have a reading of this. This is one of the classic essays. Like, Mao takes these ideas, makes them comprehensible, to the average person, because, he's speaking to, people who are self-educated, let's say, right? Or, it's not everyone who's, in the People's Army is like, highly educated, of course, right? So there's a tremendous role for simplifying these philosophical concepts and also saying why they matter, right? And so Mao does this. He looks at the history, and he says, look, here's why we have to understand contradiction. Here's how it actually helps us, right? Here's how it makes us more effective guerrilla fighters, right? Now that's impressive, right? So that's a great contribution to kind of understanding and popularizing this. I would love to know more about Ho Chi Minh thought. I mean, this is something that I haven't studied very much. I think it's very, very critical that, we take these big ideas from Marxism and talk about them in context, talk about them, in the context of the struggle that's going on now at the time and place that it's relevant.
We also learn about Mao in Vietnam, of course, but mostly in Vietnamese, we focus on Ho Chi Minh thought. And the way that we understand about it is that, like, first we study about basic principle, the universal principles of Marxism, Leninism. And then we focus on Ho Chi Minh thought, which is the application of that ideology into the material condition of Vietnam. And we also respect very much Mao, and we understanding that Mao thought is also application of Marxism-Leninism into the material condition of China at that time. And we even understand that even Leninism developed Marxism into a higher stage. But it's also, he said it clearly that this is a development for Russia under the Tsar and around 1920 of Russia. So it is a thing that the thing that I've been saying a lot to like Western leftists, especially Western Marxists, and it's like, you do not take those books as Bible. What you should do and you must do is you learn the basic principles of it, and then you are the ones who have to apply those basic principles into your society's material condition to have your own version of application of it. And that is what you should do. Because like one of the biggest problems is that, like, like a lot of what I call them, like, we call them like ultra leftists. They really treat the books by Marx, Engels, and Lenin as Bible. And if we, like country in Vietnam, we've been criticized of being like revisionist and also traitor of communism because we do not do exactly what the book said 200 years ago. And that is one very big problem of Western leftists in that sense that like they treat those books as Bibles, and if like we dare to do anything creatively, we not real Marxists anymore. And the one of the very like basic point in Ho Chi Minh thought is that we as the Marxists, Vietnamese Marxists, we have to apply theory into practice creatively. That is very important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we look at the existing history of socialism, we kind of are forced to admit that a big part of the theory just did not materialize in the way that Marx and Engels thought, right? Marx and Engels, I mean, you read the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels thought the revolution had the biggest shot was going to be in Germany, right? Germany was already a highly industrialized country. The theory was, look, it is industrialization, it's the progress of capitalism that brings the workers together and creates class consciousness, and workers begin to advocate for their interests, right? So, and Germany, like to give them credit, Germany came quite close, right? That almost did happen. So, I'm not saying the theory is wrong. It's just that what a surprise, right? That the first socialist revolution occurs in the least industrialized country in Europe, a country that has, with capitalism is in its very beginning stages, compared to England or France or Germany, right? And so the major challenge becomes, how do you take this, agrarian economy, right? 90+% of the population, the economy is in the countryside, is agrarian.
Peasants.
How do you take that and develop that, right? And I have the sense that that's also was Vietnam's problem or issue. It was certainly China's issue, right? And so this is interesting, right? Because that puts you, somewhat off the map in terms of, when you look at like the classics, you look at the Communist Manifesto, you look at, the German ideology, you look at the, economic and philosophical manuscripts, you don't have an exact blueprint anyway, right? But from what you have, you're forced to do something different, right? You're forced to grapple with imperialism, right? And this is not something that Marx and Engels talk a lot about. They talk about it some, but Lenin develops the theory of imperialism to a much greater extent than anything that you find in Marx and Engels. They clearly they were headed in that direction, right? But this is why it's great that we have a whole Marxist tradition, right? And there are contributions, right? People do add to the tradition, and that's helpful, right? We needed a good theory of imperialism, and there's still debates about this, whatever, right? But then when we get to the level of strategy, like, well, what do you actually do about that? How do you actually develop the economy? Well, this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? And then you see the limitations of theory, and you see the need for creativity, and really looking hard at like, well, what is the situation, and how do you actually improve people's lives, right? And what are the constraints that you're dealing with?
Yeah, because we this is a thing that we learn in both basic principle of Marxism-Leninism and Ho Chi Minh thought. Is that like the point of learning all of this? Like lots of students ask, like, why are you learning all of this? The point of learning all of this is to change the world. Is to have a better world for the working class. So like we in Vietnamese curriculum, we focus very much on putting theory into practice. And Ho Chi Minh has a very funny, famous quote. Like he said, if you read thousands of books but you fail to apply theory into practice, you're nothing but a bookshelf.
Yeah.
That is very important. So
solid quote right there, yeah. Don't be a bookshelf.
Yeah. Ho Chi Minh was the one who, and lots of other Vietnamese communists too. They was the one who learned Marxism-Leninism outside of Vietnam, brought it back to Vietnam, and applied it into the Vietnamese material conditions and had a successful revolution. And I've been saying a lot in my channel is that I don't want people to look at Vietnam and treat Vietnam as we never did anything wrong, or you must follow exactly what we did in our history. No, you don't, and you can't, because every country, every society, we have a different material conditions, and we did mistakes. We made a lot of mistakes. What I want to do, what Vietnam wants you to do, is to look at us and learn lessons from us. Try to learn what we did wrong and what we did right, and take experience from that and then apply theory into practice, and just know that you will make mistakes. But it doesn't mean that you should stop and you never stop trying doing it. It's just like dialectical materialism, consider things from many angles, many perspectives, a different timeline, a different time to make sure that you have a comprehensive and historical viewpoint before you do things. But the most important thing is you have to do it. You have to apply theory into practice, or else you're just a bookshelf.
And you have to make hard choices, right? Because when you start to apply things, and when you start dealing with the fact that you have constraints, right? Like, a socialist country in a world of imperialist powers has to defend itself, right? I mean, that is a reality, and we've seen that over and over again. And what happens to a country that doesn't defend itself well, right? Or what happens to a country that is not well integrated into the global economy? Well, we see that sanctions are a tool of the imperialist West, right? I mean, like, the United States wields sanctions as a weapon, absolutely, right? That is very, very clear at this point. It couldn't be clearer, right? And not just against third world or whatever developing nations. No, not at all. I mean, we see this employed against Russia, right? Russia's a modern industrial power, but the tool of sanctions, or the weapon of sanctions, is being used against Russia. So, it's a kind of it's a constraint, right? You recognize, look, if a country is not fully integrated, it's kind of like the tale of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea or Cuba, right? These are countries which it was easy to isolate, right, through sanctions, because either because they weren't well diversified in the case of Cuba, or they weren't well connected to the kind of neoliberal regime of global trade, right? So people look at China and they say, well, China is just capitalism, right? Well, China made a kind of devil's bargain, which is, we will be your low-wage manufacturing center. We will serve the interests of the neoliberal capitalist order. And in exchange for that, we will transfer the technology, right? We will move up the value-added chain, and we will become the top manufacturer. You cannot become the top manufacturer without producing the most valuable products you can, right? So, like, you got to go from textiles to cars, right? You got to go from cars to electronics. You got to go from electronics to, robots and nanotechnology, or whatever is coming next, right? And China has been incredibly successful at this. And along the way, they have also managed to make it impossible to sanction them, right? I mean, if you sanction China, you might as well just shoot yourself in the leg, right? I mean, like, because every country needs China's manufactured goods, right? So this is, but like, should we as Marxists, like, say, oh, that's not a contradiction? No, of course it's a contradiction. Are you kidding me? Right? That's a major contradiction. Like, serving the interests of the neoliberal, global order, like, that's a huge contradiction, right? But, we can't be afraid of contradictions. We can't be looking at the world and expecting, to have pure timeless categories, right? I mean, like, that's the basics of dialectical materialism is, look, everything has contradictions. The question is, how do you manage those contradictions, and where are you going with it, right? And we just have to have a good analysis. I mean, this is, I think, the point of this. It's not to do fancy philosophy, right? It's not to do a bunch of pretty words. It's like, how do we actually manage the complexities of keeping power, and why do we want to keep power? To improve people's lives, right? I mean, that's why we do this.
Yeah, exactly. The same with Vietnam. Vietnam, after we won the Vietnam War in 1975, we spent 10 straight years trying to build a communist society where my mom lived through that time, and I had video where my mom talk about it. We didn't use money. Instead, we used stamps. And it's a subsidizing model of society where, like, for example, the whole family, the whole village, including my mom, worked together on the vast rice field outside of the village. And in the harvest season, the whole village would go and harvest everything by themselves, brought them to the big yard of the village, and then handing the amount of rice that we need to do to give it to the government of Vietnam to raise other people, to feed other people, and we keep the rest, and then we will be redistribute an equal amount of rice back. So this is like the idea, the very pure idea of communism in societies of like moneyless society, and everybody join and work together and receive, according exactly that. But Vietnam at that time, we failed to consider the material conditions of country at that time. That plan will work well if Vietnam was not under comprehensive sanctions from the USA. If Vietnam was not bombed to the Stone Age by the USA, if Vietnam was not sprayed with 80 million liters of Agent Orange, all kind of toxins from the USA by the USA. Right. So, and we failed to consider that. So 10 years of trying so hard, and we failed because we did not have enough raw material for all of that. And my mom had to endure the huge famine at that time. So up until 1986, Vietnam had to revise what we did in 10 years, and we decided to take a step back by like following the Đổi mới reform, the Đổi mới renewal. And that was when Vietnam had to do what the IMF and World Bank asked us to do, so we can borrow money from them. They didn't even give us money. We had to do all of that so we can borrow their money, so we can rebuild our country, so we can persuade the USA that we are your friend now, please stop sanctioning us. I was born in the US sanction. And I was born in like extreme poverty imposed on us by the USA. So I really understand it very well. The life of millions of people with the inhumane sanction like that. And Vietnam had to do that. So it means that, like, yes, we know that that's a contradiction. And Vietnam did try to have a communist society, but we failed because of so many reasons. So I totally agree with you that, yes, there are contradictions, and there's going to be a lot of contradictions. What you do is you have to consider, because sometimes you have to choose what is better for your people. And then you have to take a step back to feed your people. My mom could have died. If Vietnam still stopped being stubborn and following that path. So, and Vietnam could still be under the U.S. sanctions right now to this day, And yeah.
I'm sorry. I think there's some value in trying new things, right? I mean, because no one really knows what a society without exploitation looks like, right? So, we try to get there. I mean, we have, but there's also the reality of global power. There's the reality of imperialism, and that's a harsh reality. And thank you for giving that summary of the history too. I think that's important to just keep in mind, right? That we have this horrible thing that we're told, oh, communism starves people, and it's like, really, like, we're going to ignore the role of sanctions in that, I mean, like,
yeah,
but yeah, that's what we're told. North Korea starves people, and it's like, okay, well, what is being withheld from them, right? I mean,
exactly.
to isolate a country from the regime of global trade, that's a pretty heavy burden on a country. And even a country like, in North Korea places a tremendous value on self-sufficiency. It's part of the Juche philosophy, right? Be very, very self-sufficient. I mean, and they've gone further with this than a lot of other countries, but no country can go it alone. I mean, I think there's a lesson in that, right? Like, we're all connected. So I'm sorry to interrupt, though, but I hope you were finished.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. And in Vietnam, we have a belief, it's a very dialectical materialist belief that you take one step back, but in the future, you're going to have 2 steps forward. So Vietnam did take a step back in 1990s when we had Đổi mới reform. So we can get out of the U.S. sanction if Vietnam will. But Vietnam right now, we are very stable in food. Our food security is awesome. And right now, in my lifetime, I was born under U.S. sanctions in extreme poverty. But right now, I'm 30 years old and I'm seeing the U.S. is going through food like insecurity right now. And I'm seeing that the U.S. is trying so hard to persuade Vietnam to deepen the relationship with the USA and trying so hard to persuade us to export more food to USA happening right now. For example, the honey, the Vietnamese honey. Before that, they imposed anti-dumping tax on Vietnamese honey, aside with and many other food too, up to 412%. 412%. It was so rough for Vietnam. It was like almost destroy our honey industry in Vietnam that we cannot export it to the USA anymore. But now because of the food insecurity, the US lowered the tax down from 412% down to like 49, 51%, like 8 times. They lowered 8 times. And by the way, it's still ridiculously high. That is why the food is so expensive in the USA. That is like the tax, the unfair tax that they impose on us. But yeah, talk about the 2-step forwards. Vietnam now in the situation that like we can decide to export food to USA or not, and they will have to work in our terms, not the other way around.
That's a great example. I mean, just the whole concept of dumping and the idea that a country would be penalized for so-called dumping. I mean, this goes against the very neoliberal principles that the United States and the Washington Consensus and whatever have spread all over the world, right? Because the whole theory is, right? I mean, the whole theory of free trade is, okay, countries should specialize, whatever, right? And then they should produce things, and the world will benefit from having lower prices, et cetera, right? Well, if you put hundreds of % kind of tax on this, right, you're destroying the whole rationale for free trade, right? And why, right? Because you want to punish socialism, right? And then you want to say, well, this country in which the cost of living is far lower, and so hence the wage level is far lower, right? I mean, that's how it works, right? I mean, that's this, and everyone knows this, right? But because they're socialists, well, then you're going to punish them, right? Then you're going to use words like dumping, or if they run afoul of the U.S. empire for whatever reason. I mean, a country doesn't need to be socialist to run afoul of the U.S. empire, right? I mean, we're seeing that right now with Russia, right? Russia is not socialist, but Russia is not kowtowing enough to U.S. interests, and so Russia's being punished, right? And it's being punished with that same weapon. And I just think it's fascinating to just point out the hypocrisy of this, right? Like, hey, if free trade is good, then it's supposed to be good for everybody, right? But the reality, of course, is that free trade is just a cover, right? I mean, it's always been a hypocrisy, right? It's about global power, right? It's about global domination. And, when a country is ahead, when free trade favors them, well, then they celebrate free trade, right? When it doesn't favor them, they say, no, well, we need fair trade or whatever, right? This is essentially nonsense,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, since you're an economist, so there's one thing that I want to ask you. Last year, when the U.S. economy was really bad because of COVID-19, the pandemic, so that was why the exchange rate between U.S. dollars and Vietnam dong is very changed a lot. So our Vietnamese dong actually had more power than the USD. Immediately, the U.S. economists, bourgeois economists, they cry out loud and they claim Vietnam that we are currency manipulator. And it's so my very basic understanding of that, because they are losing in the battlefield of the economy. So they had to use their propaganda machine to, accuse us of doing things that clearly we didn't even do it. It's just their economy sucks. That is why. Yeah. So what do you think about this? The situation.
Well, I think the charge of currency manipulation is very similar to the kind of charge of dumping. It's very unevenly applied. It's very hypocritical. I know less about Vietnam than I do about China here, but China has often been accused of the very same thing, right? Of
Yeah.
manipulating their currency, right? And China has, this is a very strange charge because China has essentially done exactly what the IMF and World Bank say to do, right? Which is they say, look, have currency reserves and stabilize the value of your currency, right? And they'll even say, weaken the value of your currency to make your exports more attractive on the global market, right? China followed this to the letter, right? I mean, China never took IMF or World Bank money, but which is good because that's a pair of golden handcuffs on you often, right? So,
Yes.
it's but they still they're well aware of what the IMF says to do, right? And I mean, China has very good economists here. They have people that study this, right? And there's like, well, there is something to this. You don't want to lose control of your economy, but if you're trying to do export-led growth, which China has certainly been a major success story at, well, then it makes sense to have your goods be attractively priced on the global market, and the best way to do that is to stabilize the value of your currency and keep it relatively low. Now, is this manipulation? Look, this is a world of fiat currencies. Currencies do not have a set value. Manipulation, what is that? I mean, the greatest currency manipulator is the United States. I mean, the United States created the global regime of fiat currencies, and we did this in a very sneaky fashion, right? I mean, the chaos of World War II, the Bretton Woods system that says, United States, we have immense gold reserves. We will put our gold behind the U.S. dollar, and the dollar is as good as gold. And then you can peg your currency to the U.S. dollar, and we'll have stability, right? We will rebuild global trade, which had been devastated by World War II. And that was successful, right? But then 30 years later, the U.S. dollar drops gold, right? And then says, what, trust us. And, has since then used that trust to suck up trillions of dollars from the rest of the economy and not provide an equivalent amount of value, right? The United States can do that because we have the global reserve currency, right? And then we use that power to punish any country which, tries to develop itself. And then, the charge of manipulation is used by the propaganda machine. It's ridiculous because nobody explains that, right? They just say, oh, well, you're a currency manipulator, right? Like, there's no economic explanation of that. There's no comprehensive theory, like even by people who are economists, right? Paul Krugman will do this. He'll be like, well, the Chinese yuan is undervalued by 20%. It's like, well, where are you getting these numbers from, right? And what should it be valued, right? There is no anchor. No country has an anchor, right? Because no country's currency is tied to any kind of commodity, right? So, who are you to say that it should be higher or lower? And the fact is, right, countries which follow the rules still sometimes get penalized. I can't really comment because I don't follow the Vietnam versus the US dollar very closely. So I don't know that particular situation, but I'm just sort of commenting the general charge of currency manipulation, which I think is just a complete BS charge.
Yeah, the situation in Vietnam was very much the same. I mean, we was punished because our currency, our exchange rate suddenly became better for our currency and worse for the USA. And we were forced, we did. We were forced to go back to the original exchange rate. It was really unfair, but we couldn't do anything because how can we do with the global power like that? And we have to do what they want. Yeah, it's frustrating,
and Vietnam is a small country, right? So it's not like some kind of power block, but it is important to kind of create these relationships, I think. And it's also complicated because even socialist nations, okay, you be socialist, but you still have to deal with the geopolitical realities, right? And the reality is, right, every country is a sort of hostile power to every other country. That's the kind of framework that countries deal with. And then you can have sad things that happen, right? Jockeying or conflict between different socialist powers, and that's a sad thing, but it's a reality. It's one of the contradictions of the global order.
Conrad Skydog said, being a communist in bourgeois academia is super annoying. I can't even tell you the number of times I've read textbook or academic articles grossly misrepresenting Marxism.
Very true.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious because I didn't study in the bourgeois academia. So can you give me some example of how they misrepresent Marxism and Leninism?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually pretty crazy, right? Because the comprehension of Marxism is so low that like you could say anything, right? I mean, you could say, you could say Marx believed slavery or some shit like that, right? And like you'd find an audience for that, right? I mean, like it is literally you could say the craziest things. And if you've read a little bit, right? I mean, I just read this bullshit article recently that talked all about primitive communism and basically arguing that Marx and Engels are completely wrong about this, and there's no primitive communism or whatever, and that different hunter-gatherer groups, accumulated power by who they distributed the food to and whatever, as if this somehow disproves Marxism. I mean, it was ludicrous, like, because the understanding of the theory, it was like confidently presented, but anybody who knows Marxism is like, yeah, but that has nothing to do with any of the salient features of the theory, right? So, I'm like, where do I even begin, right? I mean, there's so many examples of just horrible thinking or just misrepresenting Marxism because, the fact is you're basically very much discouraged from reading any of these texts, like, I mean, the one exception is maybe the Communist Manifesto, because the Communist Manifesto has such sort of historical value, right? So if you read the Communist Manifesto, fine, lots of courses, assign that or whatever. I don't know that people really take it seriously, though, but nobody assigns capital, right? Nobody assigns the real, mature economic work of Marx.
Exactly.
And certainly nobody suggests that you read Lenin, and absolutely no one will say read Stalin. No one will say read Mao, right? I mean, that is if you have a book by Mao in a classroom in the United States, you're going to be hearing audible gasps from people. I mean, like,
gosh.
So and yet these are very good texts. I mean, Mao, Stalin, these were great educators. These are people who made a tremendous effort to connect with ordinary people. And that's not very well respected in academia, right? In Western academia, because it's like, okay, we make everything more complicated and make everything highly footnoted and whatever, right? And make sure it connects with the literature. Stalin didn't put a lot of effort into that, right? Mao didn't put a lot of effort into that because the average person doesn't need a bunch of footnotes, right? You need it to be clear and get to the point and tell me why it matters, right? But these are the things that these texts do quite well. And so I think these thinkers don't get much, they don't get respected as great theorists within Marxism or great popularizers or whatever the right term is, right? Because it's like, well, it doesn't follow the kind of academic, format or whatever, right? Even though some others that didn't follow that format very well either, like I'm thinking of Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci is very well respected in Western academia, but it's like you don't have to grapple with any complexities if you study Gramsci, because Gramsci never held any power, right? So Gramsci's never made any decisions which actually affected people's lives, right? Stalin and Mao did, right? And that has its own contradictions, because then you say, well, all right, you have a deluge of propaganda that says, oh, these are evil monsters, right? With no justification, basically, right? Or lies as justification. So I think that it's kind of like the U.S. left is kind of like it's safer to love the losers, that kind of thing, right? Because then you never have to deal with the contradictions, But it's dangerous, because then we're going down a path where we're thinking that it's possible to avoid contradictions. It's not, that's not the theory.
Yeah, exactly. I want to shout out to a Brazilian comrade who wrote a really awesome article talking about how the U.S. the West the U.S. leftists love like defeatism and martyrdom. Means that they only love revolutions that failed.
Yeah, right.
That is why, and they only love the revolutionaries who were assassinated by the bourgeois state, something like that. It was why like countries like Vietnam, China, Cuba, North Korea, we still exist to this day. That is why they just dunk on us. They call us traitor to communism because we succeeded and we still exist. That is why we did many things wrong. Just like Antonio Gramsci. I love Antonio Gramsci, but his life was so sad. And he
I
died so
know.
young. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just so sad. And I strongly believe that if somehow Gramsci walked out of the prison, stay alive, and successful led a revolution, he would be like traitor of communism, according
Yeah,
to
because
those
Gramsci
people.
was a great supporter of Stalin. I mean, and
Yeah.
but a great thinker. I think it's sort of the Christian tradition. The Christian tradition really uplifts martyrdom. So there is something to that. And then it's like you want to see these ideas as pure or something. But
Yeah.
again, we have to like always keep on hammering this, like seeing ideas as pure essences. This is metaphysics. This is really the opposite of dialectical materialism. Like we don't want to be having this kind of magical thinking, right? We don't want to be falling into this idealism and thinking that, oh, well, everything is composed of these pure essences. No, the theory is, look, everything has their contradictions, and that's a good thing to understand because, one of the principles is like, well, you push and you get quantitative change and then you get qualitative change. And this is one of the things we're very interested in as revolutionaries, right? I mean, a revolution is an enormous qualitative change, like we need to study that, and we need to have a philosophy which takes change seriously. If you're studying static, essential, pure qualities, if you're studying metaphysics, you're not really taking change seriously. You're looking basically at timeless categories, and it's not that helpful.
Exactly. I talked to a lot of academics who are Marxist, even philosophers, and a lot of them told me that in the West you have to teach yourself Marxism and dialectical materialism because it's not accepted in Western academic settings. What do you think about this?
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, and this is the strange thing about the discourse around universities in the United States is that, the reactionary right says, oh my God, the U.S. university system run by communists. And it's like, no, that's nonsense, right?
We
U.S. universities
wish.
are led by reactionaries with liberal tendencies. I mean, that's the best way to kind of describe it, right? Like the administration is, they're reactionaries. They just, they use the right language, that's politically correct in identity politics and so on, right? So, they read as and educated and whatever, right? But when you look at the actual things they support, it's incredibly reactionary. I mean, and is Marxism taught or taken seriously in universities? Not at all. I mean, like, you are lucky if somebody tells you to read the Communist Manifesto, but like, you are not going to find, or maybe the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. That's a sort of popular one for Marx, right? Which is interesting because this is written before the Communist Manifesto. This is written before Marx, spent 20 years studying economics. So you have things that are in a much less developed form. I mean, Marx is much younger, right? I mean, so there's a kind of development that occurs throughout just even Marx and Engels' own lives, right? They learn more, they study more, and the theory, gets formed, we see this in Das Kapital and so on, right? So I think, just the notion that anyone is communist or whatever, universities are incredibly hostile to communists. And you do have to teach yourself, right? I mean, I went out of my way to study at one of the few places that actually took Marxism seriously in economics. Economics is even worse than the rest of the academy, in my view, because it's very rigid, right? And you have a tremendous amount of math to learn, right? Math and statistics are highly dominant. If you're going to study Marxism, you're really going to do it on your own time, and that's difficult because getting the regular curriculum takes a lot of your time and effort. Like it's so okay, you're going to do this on your own time as a kind of hobby. Well, are you going to be as good at it as somebody who is studying nothing but that? Of course not. I mean, don't be ridiculous, right? So, like I said, I went out of my way to study was the University of Massachusetts Amherst. This is known as a place that, it's an international destination for Marxism. And even there, it's still kind of the same. Most of the curriculum is dominated by standard theory. I was lucky enough to study with Richard Wolff and Stephen Resnick when he was still alive. So, these are two noted Marxist thinkers. But, our issue there was, so we did get very good, I think, exposure to the theory of class. We did read the 3 volumes of Capital very closely, but this is only in a few classes, right? So I have to say the theory, it's still sort of dominated by the standard theory. And there's a lot of fear around that, like if you don't learn the standard theory, you're never going to get a job, which I have to say, just as a side note, bullshit, right? Like getting a job is mostly a function of what school you graduated from. Nobody knows or cares what you really learned, like what are you going to take a test or something? No, you're not, right? It's about where did you go to school and who wrote you letters of recommendation, right? I mean, that's, as far as I can tell, right, this has a lot to do with your later employment. But we had this shadow of fear over us, right, which is that even those of us who are really interested in Marxism, it was like, well, you can't be too into it, you can't, and you certainly can't be known for that, and God forbid you should be known as an orthodox Marxist, right, or whatever the hell that means, right? So it's like, you have all these mechanisms which discourage you, personally and professionally from really pursuing it. And so I don't think it should be much of a surprise when you end up finding that, even the people who are known for it are just simply not as good, I see I'm getting a bunch of comments here in the thread here. That's good.
Ray said like, hey, I went to Riverside City College, Dr. Bair.
All right. Good to see you. Hello.
I have exact opposite experience as a student in Vietnam, because Marxism-Leninism were like the class that all students must pass if we want to graduate from our university. So for 4 years, every semester, I had to learn Marxism, Leninism, Ho Chi Minh taught in the Socialist Path of the Communist Party of Vietnam. And to me at that time, I felt so miserable, because I had to learn all the basic principles of historical materialism, dialectical materialism, economic, scientific socialism. Like, it felt so boring. Like an 18-year-old girl had to write like long essays about historical materialism and the material conditions of Vietnam and how it changed it, and then the position of the Vietnamese in the path of to socialism, things like that. But thinking back now, it helped me a lot. I have to say, especially when I started my channel and I had, direct, connection and direct conversation with Westerners, Western leftists. Like, I suddenly found out that, wow, that education that I thought so boring before now actually helped me a lot, because from the start, I always try to look at things from different angles, as many as possible, and try to consider things with its own contradictions and complexity, and try to not fall into those like unilateral perspective like that. And it's the thing that I do not see in the Western leftists. By the way, in the beginning, you mentioned analytical Marxism, and I have only read a little bit about analytical Marxism, and it seems to me like it's like a complete distortion of Marxism, and seems like it totally abandoned, dialectical materialism. So can you please tell us a little bit more about analytical Marxism and its impact on Western academic study of Marx? Because it is a new thing in Vietnam, and I tried to Google it in Vietnamese, and I couldn't see anything of like analytical Marxism in Vietnam.
That's good. This is like people who kind of take as their basic presumption that dialectics is kind of nonsense, or like that the theory of contradiction, or, so they're rejecting like kind of key parts, and then like, well, how do you like prove the validity of a theory, right? I mean, even that kind of formulation, right? I mean, even that formulation is kind of alien to Marxism, right? Like I don't think, Marxist thinkers don't typically say, how do you prove the validity of a theory in that way, right? They say, well, is the theory useful? Like does it help you to understand things better, right? Does it form a better tool, right? I mean, like, this is kind of how Mao proceeds, right? Like, hey, here's why dialectical materialism is helpful. It's helping us win a revolution, right? Against, a dominant
Yeah.
political party that is well funded by outside powers, right? I mean, like, this
Yeah.
is why it's helpful, So nobody cares to see like a mathematical proof or something like this, right? Like, if you have that pragmatic focus, and that kind of focus is very much a part of the Marxist tradition, right? It's called praxis, that theory alone is not what we're interested in, right? Because we're not interested in pure theory. We're interested in the effectiveness of it, right? The use of it. And we recognize that any tool is going to change when you use it, right? So, and that's good, right? I mean, that itself has a dialectical contradiction, right? Like, as you apply something, the theory will also be changed by that. Theory is not a pure thing and then application is a dirty thing, right? No, it's not like that. There's a relationship between these things, and we have to be alive to that relationship. We need to study that, right? We need to allow the theory to be alive and not treat it as a set of set
Yeah.
precepts, but treat it as, okay, it's a guide, right? It's not like, some kind of holy text, right? We need to let it breathe. So I think that all of these things kind of come into play when analytical Marxism is like, let's put all these propositions into the form of variables. Let's put them in functions. Let's prove them. I mean, especially within economics, and I just don't see the utility of it. Like, who is it helping? Like, it's helping people who are already very much believe in this perspective of formal logic, that the only things that have validity are things that can be shown to have a mathematical proof behind them or something like this, right? If you think that, I don't know what to tell you, right? You're already kind of off the map as far as Marxism, right? Marxism doesn't proceed that way, it just doesn't. And so, I mean, like, it's not to say that Marxism isn't logical. It just uses a different logic, right? It's the logic of contradiction, and this comes out of Hegel and out of the Hegelian tradition, and of course it takes a different form, right? Because Hegel politically was very conservative, right? I mean, Hegel had some crazy ideas when you actually look at like the concrete policies and whatever that Hegel supported. Pretty wild stuff, Like, so Marx takes this out of Hegel, right? Rejects the idealism of it, and applies it to something very different, right? Like, Hegel was not interested in the liberation of the working class. That's not, Hegel's like an old school elitist, but Marx is, right? Engels is, right? So that already changes things, to change the focus of it. So I just think that kind of, this obsession with like formal logic, I just don't see the benefit of it. It's a lot of work actually, right? To understand these kind of dense texts, it's like, I just don't see the utility of it, right? I don't think that Marxism is weak. It's not like, oh, Marxism has some Achilles heel that needs to be defended. I don't believe that. So I just don't see it as a very helpful kind of tendency within Marxism, and I think it's unhelpful because it's taking us away from the focus on dialectical materialism, contradiction, and so forth, which many great revolutionaries have said this is vital, right?
Exactly. I do think that what I feel is that analytical Marxism serve the bourgeois philosophy. Because
Yeah,
even though they call themselves Marxists, but what they do, it was like exactly what Lenin had to deal with in his lifetime, that he had to fight against Marx. Like those people, they call themselves Marxists, but all they did was like to revise Marxism, to fight against Marxism, to undermine the thing that Marxism did for humanity, and try to to bring in the right wing pipeline. And I think I kind of have the same vibe to me about analytical Marxism. Totally, they serve the bourgeois philosophy. What do you think about
yeah.
that?
I think that's true. I mean, I want to kind of close ranks behind Marxists because I'm like, hey, if you're a Marxist and if you call yourself that in academia, you've chosen a hard road, and I'd like to be like, hey, any Marxist, I want to support you. But, I'm also torn because I'm like, yeah, but, where's your theory going? And, so
Yeah.
it's a contradiction, I mean,
Yeah.
there's certain things I'm sure that we would agree on, and
Yeah.
that's good, but I think also the problem, in academia, I mean, I could count myself in this. It's very easy to get isolated. It's very easy to, kind of take on your own concerns and you're not connected to, any kind of overall movement, right? And then you get kind of weird, you just like focus on the stuff that you think about and care about, and you stop asking the question like, well, how is this improving the average person's life, because that's a
Yeah.
hard question to ask yourself, right? As a thinker and
Yes.
as someone who's committed, like, what's your praxis? What are you doing about this? I mean, that's a
Exactly.
very hard question to ask yourself. And so I understand maybe you want to stop asking it, but I don't think we can, as Marxists, as communists, we have to keep on trying to implement these ideas. And if it becomes too, abstract and too disconnected, well, then we're not really doing that.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I totally agree with you. Say like when you call yourself like communist, Marxist, Leninist, or even leftist, you must ask yourself, who do you serve and who you want to help. That
Yeah.
is very important. And talking about this, there was a very kind of pretty big analytical Marxist that literally told to thousands of their audience that Marxism is not ethical. Dialectical materialism is not ethical. I was really shocked when I
Yeah.
hear about that.
That's a weird thing to say, isn't it?
It's it's
Yeah.
weird.
I think that, if you think that Marxism has no ethics or no ethical core, um, I don't know. There's something that's a little bit psychopathic about that, right? Like it reminds me a little bit of one of the things one of my mentors said to me once. That so they had a student that took studied Marxism with them and took it very seriously as an undergraduate, and then went on to start businesses and whatever. And they're like, the theory was really helpful. I learned a lot from the theory, right? And they were like, they absorbed class theory but they did not absorb the ethical position, right? Which is that it is unethical to take somebody else's surplus labor, right? And to profit from it, right? I mean, that is a core ethical idea in Marxism, right? I mean,
Exactly.
that is what connects. That is the theory of class, right? I mean, and you don't understand class fully if you don't understand the ethics, right? If you don't say, look, the thing that connects feudal serfdom and slavery and what Marx calls wage slavery, right? Capitalism. The thing that connects that is somebody else is taking your surplus labor. I mean, these are different, right? Serfs are different than slaves, than wage workers, right? But what do they all have in common? Well, somebody else is taking your surplus. Okay, and this is something that society needs to get beyond. Humanity needs to get beyond for our own good. This is a kind of illness. This is like a socialized form of theft. I mean, the stuff that I'm saying right now, this is all ethical stuff, right? But it flows directly from the understanding of class. When Marx and Engels, right? They say that the history of all hitherto existing societies is a history of class struggle. They're not saying that in a value neutral way, right? They're saying that is I mean, Marx is in capital. Capital is soaked in blood and dirt. I mean, does that sound like it has no ethics behind it? I mean, that's a very strong statement, right? Like,
Yeah.
the capital is soaked in blood and dirt. I mean, I always return to that phrase. It's not neutral. I mean, this is made out of people suffering here. And we need to abolish this for the good of humanity. I mean, that's a very strong ethical position. And to say that doesn't exist, I think is. It just is not. I don't know. You either haven't read very much in it, or you're just being disingenuous.
Yeah, like I was shocked because literally a person with an academic title told that to our face that Marxism is not ethical. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? You call yourself Marxist? Like, this is the whole perspective of Marxism, is to look in the world in the perspective of the working class, of exploited people, and the whole purpose of this ideology is to liberate humanity and to end exploitation. This is ultimate ethics. I cannot understand that why the whole ideology is developed in the purpose of changing the world to have a better world for the working class with no exploitation. The whole reason why you read the 3 volumes of Capital, of Das Capital, is to learn how capitalism works, learn how it exploits people, and learn how to end it.
Right.
It is extremely ethical. I mean, and I also did translate Ho Chi Minh's work on revolutionary ethics. It is very important, and I do wish that more and more people, especially people from the West, will learn more about it, because Ho Chi Minh, he also wrote a lot about ethics, especially ethics of revolutionaries. Right. And long story short, mostly in his belief, he mostly believed that communist revolutionaries, our ethics is we must care about people, care for people, and we serve the people. The whole point is to unite Vietnamese and gain our independence, freedom, and self-determination. That is our ethics, and we all should follow that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's very much of a piece with Mao. I mean, Mao followed this ethos as well, right? He said, you cannot, the People's Army has to behave very differently than armies have traditionally behaved, right? Armies typically move through the countryside, take what they want, steal things, rape women. I mean, but we have to behave very differently. We have to be one with the people, and we have to pay for what we use, right? We can't be going through and breaking the law. We can't be going through and, brutalizing people. And, and that's remarkable when you think about it, right? Because warfare has a long history, right? And armies pretty much behave the same way in warfare, right? To break with that immensely long tradition requires a tremendous strength of principle, and to be able to, not just discipline your army, but to convince them, that this is actually the path to victory. We're not even necessarily doing this because we're good people, but I mean, if that works, then yeah, right. We're doing this because we want to be successful. We want to be successful revolutionaries, and if we alienate people, we're not going to be successful revolutionaries because, right, there has to be that strong organic connection.
Yeah. We just had a super chat from Andre Music, and said where is Vietnam and Chinese comradeship? Don't worry. Vietnam and China, we have a very strong relationship with each other, and China is our biggest market for our agricultural products. So yes, the relationship between Vietnam and China is going to be very powerful more in the future. And the super chat from F. Boa said Marxism is human-centric. Yes,
I think that's true.
It is human-centric. Yeah, absolutely. It is the whole point. You learn all of this boring principle. It's just to liberate humanity, how to create a society where people can be free of exploitation. And and that's just it.
I mean, we have to kind of also take seriously, Marxism is biased in favor of the working class, right? I mean, that is, let's be honest, right? I mean, there's no theory that's unbiased, first of all. But, the bourgeoisie dominate, right? I mean, and, they fund the theories which are favorable to the bourgeoisie. I mean, this is what we see in economics, the strongest, pro-capitalist economic arguments that's the dominant form of economics, right? So, there is, nothing is unbiased, right? But we have this strange kind of liberal idea that says the working class is just one group, and then, the bourgeoisie is another group, and why should we privilege one and hurt the other one or whatever? And it's well, because the bourgeoisie is bloodsuckers, right? I mean, that bloodsuckers existing on the body, of humanity, right? Like, it's not two equal-sized groups, right? It's a tiny group which is sucking the blood of the larger body, right? So that's not necessary, right? You don't need that. So, I think that the ethics here are very important to. I personally, I never want to get away from that, right? Like, what I do in my own arguments is absolutely a combination of economic analysis and ethical arguments. Like, I'm not ashamed of that, right? I mean, that's what makes it effective sloganeering. You have to speak to ethics is speaking to people's emotions, right? And that's important here. Like, aren't we sick of the world being run by psychopaths who are sucking the resources and ruining humanity? I mean, like, I'm fucking sick of that. I'll be honest, right? I'm angry about it. Like, if you're not, then how are you paying attention? That's an ethical perspective, right? And we shouldn't shy away from that, right? Like, because it's part of being human. Like, we have a rational side where we analyze things, and we also have a heart and we have emotions. Like, we have to. That's part of being human, right? We have ethics.
Exactly. I was born. My family went through both colonialism and imperialism, and this is a thing that I have a deep feeling about this because all four of my grandpa and my grandma went through the famine in the 1940s caused by fascism and colonialism by Japan and France. They barely survived at that time. And also one of my grandpa was a soldier fighting for communists. He was a Vietnamese soldier, and he died in 1968 in Tet Offensive. And then my dad, he went to the USSR, he went to Belarus to study for 3 years in 1976 to 1978. And then he went back to Vietnam. And after he went back to Vietnam, he immediately went to Laos and spent 10 years building roads for Laos, solely for free like that. A non-obligation aid Vietnam gave Laos in the 1980s when Vietnam was still under the U.S. sanction, like solidarity like that. So, and I was born under the U.S. sanction. I just talk about that. It means that my whole family has very deep, family history with colonialism, imperialism, U.S. sanction. And I'm living in Vietnam today following our socialist path, where I'm literally hearing that our Vietnam officially tries to eliminate extreme poverty in 1930. Now our extreme poverty rate is 2.75%, and we will eliminate that in the next few years. Also, Vietnam will be stable in green energy. Also, around the same time, we are building very hard, like solar energy system and also wind energy power plant like that. And by 2045, by 2045, Vietnam will be a developed country, and we will move forward our target to really strive toward communism. It's like our clear path like that. Oh, and by the way, talking about the green energy, did you know that last year, Vietnam alone accounted for 10% of the global green energy development?
Wow.
That was how we tried so hard to have a sustainable energy system like that. So that is it. It means that Vietnam has been through a lot, but we are getting better. Why I literally seeing what's been going on in the imperial core it's like mass shooting everywhere, nearly every week, and just and what are you gonna do about it? I don't know.
I think that's a great illustration. That statistic that you mentioned is a great illustration of how quickly things can move under socialism, right? Because you can actually marshal all of society's resources behind a certain goal, right? So if you say you want energy self-sufficiency, you want green energy, I mean, you can make that happen incredibly quickly, right? And that's inspiring because that's the kind of thing that we need, right? I mean, we need that to happen on a global level, countries like Vietnam that are doing this are showing what's possible, even for small countries, right? Even for countries which are, still, struggling to develop and industrialize, right? So imagine what the industrialized world could do but the only way that we're going to do that is by escaping from capitalist anarchy of production, right? Like nobody's in charge of the capitalist economy, and that's partly why it's so difficult to do the things that we all need to do, right? We all know we need to address climate change. We need to shift to energy self-sufficiency. We need to shift away from fossil fuels. We're making very little progress on that, right? Through capitalism's, organic process, right? We need actual planning and leadership, and this is where socialism excels.
Oh, talking about planning, something like that. A few days ago, EJ, my partner, who is an American, he told me that, is this true? I'm shocked. I'm shocked with this true. Because he told me that, like, in the US, you feel like planned economy is something like a bad thing. Because the free market will fix everything, and the invisible hand of the market will fix everything. I'm shocked because in Vietnam, we have a clear plan for like country development, city development, rural area development. It's like an obvious thing.
Right. It makes sense, right? Like it makes intuitive sense that if you want to get someplace, you develop a plan to get there, right? Yeah. I mean, like, because that might not happen if you don't have a plan, right? I mean, a plan is no guarantee, but it makes it more likely, if you want to accomplish something. And so it is very strange, but it is correct. What he said is correct. We view planning as, basically horrible and whatever. But here's the funny thing, like when the United States wants to, we deviate from these principles, right? Because the United States actually built up Taiwan. The United States, funneled money to develop Taiwan because it was seen as, giving China a black eye, right? Like taking this region, supporting, the Kuomintang, which failing to recognize the People's Republic of China for decades, right? Keeping the Republic of China idea alive, right? Which the U.S. did, right? And then saying we're going to pour money into developing the economy of Taiwan and, high tech manufacturing, whatever. The crazy thing about all this is that they developed that economy rapidly using, guess what? Economic planning, the very thing that we go around saying, no, you can't do that. That's socialism, right? Like, well, when push comes to shove and we want to, fuck with China, then of course we'll do planning, right? Because, it's an acknowledgement, right? Planning is effective, like if you want to accomplish a goal, develop a plan,
Is that obvious that you need to do something like you run the whole country? You need to have some plan. Is that right? It's like, yeah, Israel told that is in his textbook. Literally, the textbook said that planning economy is bad. Like for example, I am making a video about the first metro line in Hanoi City of Vietnam, the capital city of Vietnam, and it's really great because we had clear plan. So that is why this metro line will line perfectly with the electric bus system, with this area to develop this area according to our plan. It's like the city would develop in a very effective way like that.
Right.
And that was why in the US, I see the public transportation over there is really bad.
Yeah.
And everything is being solved by private corporations. It's mind-blowing to me. Wow. How can you be like that? Why do you think the US is like that?
I think the major focus of the U.S. and bourgeois governments in general is to funnel money towards the bourgeoisie. I mean, to take money from the sort of tax base and then give it out to the powerful, the well-connected, the big corporations, etc. I mean, literally everything you can think of that government does either does that as its primary or as its secondary kind of mechanism. So it's even something like COVID, right? Even something that's like a public health emergency where you might think that it's hey, this is exactly the moment that we need to pull together for everybody because, hey, guess what? The rich also get COVID, right? I mean, and so the rich you might make an argument on the basis of enlightened self-interest to just say, hey, this is the moment where we're going to put aside our typical imperative, which is use government money to make the rich richer in the interest of public health. But of course, no, that is not the moment. We do not do that in the United States, right? Like, we still use the crisis as a way to give the rich and powerful and well-connected more money, right? I mean, so I feel like the only way you make sense of bourgeois governments like the United States is that is actually their primary function, and they're rather good at that function, right? But their function is not helping the average person. I mean, they might say that, right? But that's clearly not their function. Their function is not even maximizing infrastructure for capitalist development. It's not that either, right? Because, you know, like if you wanted to take a long-term vision of capitalism, you'd say, well, doesn't capitalism need good infrastructure? I mean, we are suffering for, like, all the stuff that they call supply chain issues. You know, another word for that would be shitty infrastructure. You know, I mean, like, because a lot of the supply chain issues come from that, right? They come from underinvestment in capital and labor around ports and transportation, right? Especially choke points, right, where things slow down, right? So, you know, if we had better infrastructure, we would have a better flow of goods and services. That helps capitalism, right? So, but because there isn't a cohesive interest in that, right? There is no one actually looking out for capitalism as an entire system, right? There are only private interests which jockey with one another, right? So why do we have an underdeveloped port and infrastructure system? Well, because, you know, these are profit maximizing enterprises, right? Which cut back on labor costs and other costs, right? Whenever they can, right? So, you know, this doesn't even produce an optimal path of development within a bourgeois system, right? That's important to keep in mind. I mean, when you look at what China is doing, like with their rail system, their high-speed rail, I mean, it is astonishing, right? China has laid more rail in 10 years than the rest of the world combined, right? And has gone from, I don't know what, something like the 8th, you know, country in the world to the absolute #1 country in the world. And they've done this in a remarkably short span of time, right? Because they, you know, they recognize that infrastructure development supports economic development, right? So, you know, it's just a very strange when you look at it at, like, from a kind of rational perspective. Like, you're asking a very rational question. Why don't these capitalist countries do a better fucking job, like, just managing themselves? And it's like, well, I don't know. It's not anybody's job to do that. There's no structure to do that, you know? It's like our representatives see it as their job to, like, you know, reward their powerful and rich patrons, you know, and they do a very good job at that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I've been hearing a lot from Westerners is like, you know, that it's obvious that Vietnam and China and Cuba and North Korea, like, we are evil communists. We're just evil, authoritarian, totalitarian communists. Horrible, no human rights whatsoever. But suddenly when I heard about, like, China become the richest country on earth, suddenly those people are like, oh, because China is capitalist. So what? Just please make up your mind. Is China communist or capitalist? Because those people are, like, incoherent. Their argument is totally incoherent. And whenever we did something bad, it's because of communism. Whenever we did something good, it's because of capitalism. So it means that we both. Hi, Jay.
Raid alert. Thought slime raided.
Oh, Todd Slams. Hi, welcome, Raiders. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my channel. And we are having an awesome conversation with Dr. Asatar Bair talking about Marxism and the bourgeois philosophy. Welcome, everybody. If you have any question, please leave them in the chat, and I will try to ask Dr. Asatar Bair too. We have about 30 minutes left in this interview.
I think your point that you just raised is, like, you know, what is capitalism? What is socialism? What is communism? This is really where we see a tremendous amount of idealism, right? We're like, oh, capitalism has these and these timeless qualities, right? And so does socialism. It has these timeless qualities. It's evil, you know, like this, right? This is metaphysics, right? This is idealism. You know, I mean, and that's not the perspective that comes out of dialectical materialism or Marxism, right? Like, you know, that perspective says, look, things differ depending on their context, you know, depending on their conditions, right? So, you know, the form of capitalism that we see in Germany is going to be different than the form of capitalism we see in Italy or the United States, or the form of socialism that we see in China is going to be different than what we might see in Vietnam or Cuba, or these. So there, in that sense, it's hard to say there is a thing, a timeless thing out there called socialism. Now, there are principles, of course, right, which that comes out of the theory, that comes out of the application, but there's differences too, right? So, I think it's a real problem when we are so focused on this, and especially when we're so anti-communist or so moralistic that we're super focused on, is this good or evil? Now, again, this is part of the ethics, so I'm not opposed to that, but I'm like, look, if you're going to say something is good or evil, please tell me why, right? I mean, like, this is not the end of an argument, right? This is the beginning of an argument, It's evil? Okay, interesting. Why? What makes it evil? Is it because millions of people are allowed to perish needlessly? Because if that's evil, well, that's what capitalism does, 9 million people starve to death each and every year in a world that produces enough food to feed everybody. I call that evil. I don't know what other people call that, And it's not the kind of evil where you say, I'm going to deliberately murder you, bang. But, it's an even cooler kind, isn't it? It's a kind where you say, I don't give a fuck whether you live or die, You can starve to death because you can't afford food. And starving to death is a kind of death that takes a long time to happen, It's a kind of death which kills the most vulnerable members of society, that is women and children, right, at disproportionate rates. It's unbelievably cruel, right? So, like, if you're gonna overlay your morality, you need to still make the case, right? And the anti-communists try to do this. They just do it in a way that's filled with lies and misinformation and errors in context and whatever.
Exactly. And again, in the bourgeois state, imperial core like the USA, millions of people are now homeless or being evicted by landlords. And that is not somehow evil. Or like millions of people died of a preventable disease. Isn't that evil? But when they suddenly talk about, I've born in Vietnam, living in Vietnam all of my life, seeing all of those accusations about how Vietnam violated human rights against our own people, like organization like Human Rights Watch, want to call for interventionism on Vietnam because of that. They didn't even mention about how millions of Vietnamese people were slaughtered by the USA in the Vietnam War, and how the fourth generation of Vietnamese still being born with Agent Orange, like birth defect from Agent Orange. Now, who's going to talk about those human rights violations? The USA, after they lost the Vietnam War, they didn't pay any reparation, nothing at all, didn't even apologize. And they even sanctioned us up until early 2000. Yay, awesome, America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's a hypocrite. It's like Vietnam is not perfect. Vietnam is not a utopia. We have our own problems. We never deny that. But for the USA to point their fingers at us, it's really a position of hypocrisy, because what did you even do to your own people? Go deal with your own problem first before you point your fingers at us.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too, because the effort is clearly to you cannot allow there to be an alternative to capitalism, right? Anywhere, you have to destroy it, right? I mean, that is clearly, the bourgeoisie, they have class consciousness. They act in their class interests, right? They're a much smaller group, right? But clearly that is the impetus, right? You cannot allow a socialist country anywhere because, well, I mean, it's kind of an acknowledgement, right? Like if socialism was a failed system, well, then let it fail, why invest trillions of dollars?
Let us fail. Do not bomb us to Stone Age.
No. But of course, they know it's not actually a failed system. It's a very effective system, right? It's a system which rapidly improves the lives of hundreds of millions of people. I mean, that's the actual record of socialism. So, if you care about ordinary people, right, you have to recognize that, right? You cannot afford to just believe the lies that are told about it, right? And this is why socialism remains popular in Eastern Europe, right? In these places which supposedly turned away from it, right? well, enough people remember that the quality of life was actually quite a bit higher, right? Especially for those who aren't rich, for the average person.
Yeah. If you just go quickly Google it, people in the chat, go to house ownership rate of all the countries in the world. The countries with the highest house ownership rate were like ex-socialist that used to be under the US, the USSR bloc, or an actual existing socialist country like Vietnam and China. Damn, North Korea house ownership is 100%. They literally built houses, free houses, and gave it to people. Like, that is freedom we're talking about here. That is free.
Right.
The freedom to not be homeless, to not die on the street in the cold night of the winter.
Yep.
But no, they have to talk about the freedom to, I know freedom means to die of preventable disease and freedom to die of houselessness. That is freedom in the bourgeois state, like the USA.
Or the freedom for billionaires to buy whatever newspapers they want and be able to say whatever they want. Media, right?
Bill Gates is literally the biggest farm owner in the USA. Couldn't believe it.
Right.
Meanwhile, in Vietnam, this is being brought back it brings back memory. I am owning a free piece of rice field that the government gave me when I was born. And lots of people call me bourgeoisie because of this, a petty bourgeois because of this. It's ridiculous. It's 500 square meter. It's a piece of farm that I can grow rice on it. It's right next to our house in our village. And everybody in the village, so it's a law that every single Vietnamese who was born in the rural area will be assigned a free piece of farmland that they can use to grow food. So at least it will not make us rich at all, but we will not starve because of that.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about that? Is most of the rice in Vietnam grown on these small plots, or are there larger plots where it's more industrialized in terms of the cultivation? Do you know?
It's in the law of Vietnam that no companies, no business, no corporations can own any farmlands. They all owned by farmers, individual farmers, and like cooperative agriculture cooperatives. Like my mom, she also has her own piece of farmland, and she's also a member of my village cooperative. They work collectively like that, and we also have price stabilization, where the government always makes sure that the farmer will have profit on their rice and make sure that the rice is always affordable even to the poorest Vietnamese, so we will not be hungry. So it means it's really awesome, I gotta say. That is why Vietnam is now the second biggest rice exporter in the world, only after India. Even though Vietnam is just a small,
Are there large cooperatives where farmers work together on a big piece of land? I mean, and using like advanced agricultural equipment and so on. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
That's interesting.
So this is how it works. So except the farmers in my family have their own piece of land, 500 square meter. All together, it's like a vast piece of like rice farm like that, and they form into a big cooperative. And the local government help us by they send the agriculture expert to give us advices like, this season is going to rain a lot, you should grow this, or like this is new kind of rice that you should grow because it's like has higher productivity, something like that. And they gave us like this is kind of new of like fertilizer you should use or pesticide you should use. And they also gave us like big tractors, machine to help us easier with the farming like that. So like my mom, she has a farm, but like before in Vietnam in the early 2000s, we still had like to put a lot of like labor in the farmland. But nowadays, because of the modernization, the new technology and new tractors, it's way easier to grow rice and with way higher productivity right now. And it's great. That is why Vietnam still maintains the second biggest rice importer in the world. And it's really effective like that. And again, it is owned by farmers. What did you say, EJ?
You said Vietnam's the second largest importer. It's the second largest
exporter. Vietnam's the second biggest exporter of rice.
Yes, I understand. That's an easy mistake to make. But this is fascinating, and because I think we know historically, right? This is part of Marxist theory, which is that the inequalities begin with land, right? This is like that feudalism, right? And tenant farming and whatever. This is kind of like how things begin to develop, and then capitalism comes out of this unequal feudal system, right? And so, like, one of the first things that socialist countries need to do is they need to do land reform. They need to undo the usually very unequal distribution of land, right? And so I just find this fascinating. I haven't studied Vietnam in detail, so I'm just kind of learning a little bit about this by asking you. And but I think this is vital when we're talking about some of the first things that socialist countries have to do, especially if they're agrarian dominant. Because the peasants are typically well aware that they're being they're a lot of their surplus labor is going to money lenders, landlords, et cetera, right? And maybe small capitalists because of the maldistribution of land, which puts people at risk of famine because you have many people cultivating very small, very marginal plots. I mean, this was at least true in China. This was true in Russia. I don't know the Vietnam context as well, but and so just having policies like what you're describing, that everyone gets at least a piece of land, they have access to that. I think that's just hugely important, when we talk about socialist development.
Yeah. So I can give you another example of how it works, how the corporation and the farmers in Vietnam works. We are like, this is the system that we are using is very different from the system in the imperial core. For example, Vietnam Milk is the biggest milk corporation in Vietnam. It's partially owned by the state. Okay. And in order to have enough milk to run the factory in Vietnam, and so and the fact that the factory, the corporation cannot own any farmland because that's against the law in Vietnam. So what do? They have to go to the area that they want to put their factory there, and then they persuade farmers in that area to hey, this is our plan. Do you want to help us raise cows for milk? The other farmer do you want to help us raise the grass for the cow? They had to sign an agreement to seek for the agreement from the farmers, and after the farmers agree, okay, now they will bring the cow to the farmer, gave the farmer all the machines that is necessary to extract milk and all the help like that. And then after that, they have to buy the milk from farmer to run their factory. That is how it functions. So we're trying so hard to give the most benefit possible to the farmer, and the farmer has the control of the situation. They receive the free help and advices from the factory, sign a contract with them, and then they sell the milk back to the factory with agreed price. They cannot break that. And if the farmer just do not agree, they just stop doing that, and the loss is gonna be on the corporation, not the farmer. It's I just explained in a very simple way, but it's exactly basically how it works in Vietnam.
That's important because, small farmers are at risk, right? I mean, if they don't have those kind of protections, if there's no net, then people fall and then, perish, right? So it's important to prevent that, especially for, oftentimes a small peasant farmer is just right on the edge of subsistence. So anything that happens pushes people over that edge, So, I mean, that's important stuff for people to be aware of, right? Especially in the West, where we have this idea that socialism is somehow going to cause starvation or famine, right? I mean, the opposite of that is actually true historically, right? It is the maldistribution of land that creates the risk of famine, And the first thing that socialist countries do is redistribute land, right? So but they can't, you can't deal with the problems of nature coupled with the problems of imperialist sanction, so, I mean, you talked about that history in Vietnam. So, it's sad when you see that, right? This is the imperialist powers intentionally causing famine,
Yeah. Yeah, so we had a famine in 1940s, and in 1945 we had our successful communist revolution, and right after that in 1950, 1954 we had land reform. It is how important it is to Vietnam, and the reason why 90% of Vietnamese people own our own homes to this day is mostly because of that land reform. At that time, every single house and family in Vietnam have their own house and farmland like that, and still maintained to this day. We are now dealing with a lot of capitalist contradictions right now about like the real estate bubble and how the capital is trying to raise the land of house, the price of house in Vietnam. But we are trying so hard to address that contradiction and just hard to like crack it down. Corruption too, as I said, Vietnam is not utopia, but like we see those contradictions and we will have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an approach where it comes out of dialectical materialism. You don't say, oh, there's not going to be contradictions. You say, yeah, we expect that, right? There's going to be contradictions, especially in a world that is still dominated by imperialism, that is still dominated by exploitation. We don't have examples of societies in which there is no exploitation. We have examples of different kinds of exploitation, right? And then we have the question of like, well, how is society's surplus being used? Is it overwhelmingly being used to enrich a small elite, or is it being used for the masses of people? I mean, I think like when I learned Marxism, we focused a lot on the question of who is taking the surplus, and I think not enough on the question of what are they doing with it, and because that's a little harder to assess, right? Like, okay, what are they doing? What are they doing with it? How much is it helping the average person relative to what could be done, right? I mean, I've thought about this a lot from the perspective of life expectancy, because life expectancy is one of these big macro statistics. This is the average age that somebody dies, right? So like life expectancy at birth, how long is your life, right? I mean, and that's a good proxy measure, right? And we know that socialist countries have massively and rapidly raised life expectancy. But we have to acknowledge, so have capitalist countries, right? So like, how do we assess this, right? Like, if life expectancy matters for the average person, well, okay, the United States also raised life expectancy, right? But then the question is, how did they do that, right? And did they do it as much as you could do it, right? I mean, like, because what we're seeing is like COVID had an effect to reduce life expectancy. I mean, or you look at like, like men that are in my demographic, right? Like middle-aged men, you have falling life expectancy in the United States, right? This is interesting, right? Like, who falls through the cracks, right? Who is being supported here, and socialism, when you look at especially the Soviet Union, I mean, I wrote a thread on this recently about funding medicine and funding doctors, and especially women doctors, right? The Soviet Union did this remarkable thing. It had 75% women doctors, right? This is an incredible thing. And they had more doctors than the entire United States, despite having a lower population and a far lower average level of income. So, this is a massive social investment into medicine on a large scale, right? So what could the United States have done if A, we did that kind of investment, and B, we made it accessible to everybody, right? I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of people who die each and every year for bullshit things, like, I mean, like because they can't afford insulin or stuff like this, right? Because they don't have health insurance, because they don't get preventative medical care, right? I mean, what would things be like? What could things be like in rich countries? Things could be a lot better right now if everyone got what they need. So, I think that this is, I don't know, this is one of my interests. Is also very complex, like when you look at what are the results of a style of government, right? Or what are the results of socialism? How do you actually assess that? Well, you find there's a lot of contradictions, right? But again, we can't shy from that, right? We've got to embrace that and try to make sense of it,
Yeah. Talking, I have another question for you. Is that in Vietnam we are taught in college, not just college, from like schools, secondary school, high school, that dialectical materialism exists to be applied creatively. And we focus
Hmm.
so much on applying dialectical materialism in our lives and in our revolutionary struggle. But it seems like in Western academia, like you just mostly focus on theory alone, and especially focus on old books, and there is no instruction for application at all. So do you think is that true or not, and why is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, we're so discouraged from reading the actual histories, the actual. I mean, if you want to understand Stalin, I think a good place to start would be like, why does Stalin say that he did what he did, right? Like, and is
Yeah.
that consistent with the historical record? Is that consistent with what what he told the Soviet people? Is that consistent with what they actually did? And then you study it and you're like, yeah, it actually is pretty broadly consistent, right? Like you know, but it's like you're discouraged from reading that, and then you don't have a good sense of like, well, what kind of policies did successful revolutionaries consider to be important, and why did they consider it to be important, right? What's their reasoning? How did they analyze society, and then how did they proceed? Like we in the West, we tend to look at it as like, oh, well, the Soviets were revisionist or something like this, or it was state capitalism, or like, I mean, this is now these are old ideas in Marxism, because this is stuff that Lenin said. Like Lenin didn't say this as a pejorative, but he said, look, we need to rapidly develop the economy, and we're going to do this by something called state capitalism. We're not going to allow there to be a private class of bloodsuckers. The state is going to own the means of production. Uh, but the state is going to pay you a wage, and that is called capitalism, my friends. Like when someone's paying you a wage, that's the class structure of it. But it's different because we've never had this before. We've never had a single state entity, right, which transcends competition, right, which can do effective planning. This is new. Um, so I think a lot of Western Marxists tend to be like, well, it wasn't true socialism or whatever. And it's like, well, true socialism, what's that? Like socialism is a bridge designed to get you to communism. But that's a place that nobody's ever been. It's an unknown destination. What does the bridge look like? And then you're going to tell me, oh, well, we need some other word because socialism isn't a good enough word for the transitionary state, right? I mean, even though there's a long tradition, in Marxism, again, of people using that exact term to say, hey, here's what socialism is, right? Socialism is the transition between the way that society used to be organized, right, around enriching elites, toward this new way that we're trying to work it, right, where it's about the average person. And then far in the future, maybe we won't use money. We won't need a government. We won't need any kind of coercion, right? All that stuff will wither away. And what's fascinating is how much the Soviets actually debated this at such an early point, right? I mean, they're having debates about whether the state could wither away in the 1920s. Like I look back at that and I'm like, man, you guys need to talk about something else, because obviously your state cannot wither away. I mean, you are
Cannot.
barely surviving in an imperialist world, right? Um, so I think that, like, especially like the Western, like, anarchists or, anarcho-communists or whatever, look upon this as some kind of failure because they're like, well, they didn't eliminate all oppression or whatever. And it's like, again, very idealistic. We need to look at it as like, what is the progress that was made to improving people's lives? We don't have a magic wand. We can't, wave that and say, Kazam, okay, now, no more imperialism, no more colonialism, no more exploitation. If only it were that easy. Okay, well, then I would say anybody who didn't wave that magic wand has some explaining to do. But given that that doesn't exist, what steps did we take? How did it affect people's lives? What was positive about it? What was negative about it? That's a much more difficult kind of assessment. You can't just stay in your comfortable realm of theory. You have to look at history. You have to look at politics. You have to look at what was happening. What are the limits on these countries?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's way easier to just talk about it than actually doing something about it. And the Western leftists right now is still being stuck in the ideology. Means that like they just sit there comfortably in their armchair and think about all kind of hypotheticals in their mind to find out, oh, this is my utopia and perfect society. And if you don't agree with every single thing that I come up with my mind, you're not real socialist. You're not real Marxist. So like and I see one of the biggest, what did you call it, example for this kind of, I call it disease in Western leftists is debate culture. It seems like Western leftists are drawn toward debate, and if they do a lot of talking, and if they really do a lot of talking, but they don't appreciate the dialectical relationship between theory and practice, and then they dunk on people like Vietnam, countries like Vietnam, Cuba, North Korea for actually doing something. And what do you think about this?
Well, first of all, I feel very called out because I am sitting in an armchair myself right now, and so I don't think you're talking about me,
too,
but
armchair right here.
Armchair theorists, I think debate. I don't know. I've seen. First of all, this is not a thing that interests me. I have not watched any debates like this. I kind of hate it. Like I'm like, I can't imagine spending.
Always try to avoid that.
Yeah, I just can't imagine spending an hour watching two uninformed people debate something like this. But I'm a reader, like I don't get most of my stuff from videos anyway. And I know this is a contradiction for me to come on a stream and say this, but video is important and has its place. But if my particular arc or whatever my particular thing is, I'm trained as an academic, so I do a lot of reading. That is a more efficient way for me to gather information. I think debate's more like a form of entertainment, I mean, I have, I think you do it in order to spread your ideas, right? To show that you have an ability to defend these ideas, I would certainly do it, like, I mean, and I get occasionally somebody says, oh, you should debate such and such or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, or whatever. I'll defend anybody. I'll debate anybody, because I can defend my positions, and if people are interested in that, fine. So, but I think it's, I don't like to see it, especially among, I think it can be destructive, like I don't like to see a lot of insults or call outs or whatever. I think that's kind of counterproductive. But again, it's just a form of entertainment. So I don't want to say too much negative in case I become known as some popular debate bro myself in the future, and then people will look at this stream and be like, "Well, Dr. Bair said this one thing. Now." So I'll limit my remarks to that. I'm maybe not the best person.
Yeah, right. In Vietnam, what we believe that like I agree with you, debate is just for entertainment. And that's it. You should not like gain clout to really and use that clout to go attack people that actually risking their life doing something to help people in need out there. And I find that it's very destructive. Yes, and actually you're not doing anything to help the movement, to help your own people. You're actually sabotaging it. And I just want them to just please stop. Keep debating whatever you want and leave us alone. All right? I don't really give a shit if this debate bros just keep talking about space aliens, whatever they want. I don't give a shit. But just do not dunk on the socialist path of Vietnamese. Do not just say we people did say this to my face. That Vietnam is revisionist. Vietnam is traitor to communists. And they deserve to be destroyed. They deserve to be the bombed by the USA, by U.S. infanterism. And since I support our country right now, I deserve to be attacked and harassed. And death threat, receiving death threats. That's literally what I had to deal with.
Crazy. That is just crazy. I mean, you can't look. I mean, if something is going to be, a spectacle, let's not have it turn into something abusive. I mean, but especially given the history of Vietnam, I mean, to call for these things, that just sounds like, you're basically supporting the U.S. empire at this point. I mean, like, I think, as there's a lot of different varieties of leftists, right? But like, I think if you're supporting U.S. imperialism, that becomes a problem, right? Like, could we not all unite despite our different ideologies or whatever? Could we not all unite around the idea that you don't support history's greatest war and death machine, right? Don't support that, and especially not against a country that has already been victimized, right? Already had millions of people die from that very war machine.
Yeah, exactly. They always usually say like the U.S. is bad, but Vietnam violates human rights, so I'd be okay with it if the U.S. intervened in Vietnam. It's just like those people, they believe that just sit there and talk and argue from your thoughts, you can find truth about it. This is exactly as idealism, where like you just seek the truth from your own mind, from your thoughts, without putting any into practice. And that is a totally idealist position. And you know what? They attack me and they claim that like because I do not want to debate with them about space aliens. So like they say like I am incapable of talking about like hypotheticals. I'm not a real Marxist. Like, what are you talking about? Because I'm a Marxist and I'm dialectical materialist, I do not waste my time arguing with you about the thing that will never happen in our reality, at least in the next few hundreds of years. And this is weird. This is really weird to me, seeing like people acting like that.
It is weird, yeah. But I will say, since we're on the topic of space aliens are clearly communists. If they were not, then how the hell would they be exploring space? How would they be able to get to us? Communism is the superior economic system, both on Earth and intergalactically. I think that's very clear.
Yeah,
and anyone
I mean,
can come and debate me.
Yeah. Me, on the other hand, and vast majority of Vietnamese communists who will believe in like, yes, learning theories and arguing theory is very important because it's a way to learn, it's a way to learn from each other, to have a better understanding of theories. But the next step, the more important step, is to apply the theories that you studied into practice. And then through practice, you will make mistakes or you will do the right thing. And then through that practice, you will know that, okay, my theory is not good in this situation. I had to revise my theory. And then to me, it's like a feedback loop. Theory, you practice. And then practice will complete the theory. You take the new theory and apply the new thing. Like, it's like a loop like that. And eventually you will get better and better in your path. But as I said, it's easier to talk than to act. That is why Western leftists, they mostly just argue about their version of utopia in their head without really actually doing something to change the society. Meanwhile, hundreds of people, thousands of people dying in their own home, like neighbor in the neighborhood like that. And it's a big problem.
Yeah, right. I mean, and I think that we also need training in terms of like, how do you productively disagree, right? I mean, there are some theoretical differences, right? And some of these are important, but how do you have like a dialogue where you're disagreeing and where you're learning from each other and where you don't like close down and, it becomes unproductive or whatever, right? That's a challenge because it's like, that requires training. We're not actually trained in that. We're trained to kind of, struggle for dominance or whatever, and it's like, that is itself a kind of anti-communist paradigm, right? Like the struggle for dominance and the strong should survive. This is fascism, right? This is not communism, right? Communism is, look, none of us have enough knowledge, right? We have to do this collectively, right? We're not looking for a great leader, we're not looking for who's the strongest and whatever, right? We have to do this together. And, I wanted to, this actually kind of tracks back to the thing that we were talking about before about planning, which is that if you have a plan that you're working towards on a societal level, you actually have the potential to be democratic with that, right? Like, because you're saying, look, does this reflect our shared goals as a society, right? And you need that, right? Because I think Marxism, again, the ethics of it are, we put a lot of faith in the masses, right? I mean, like, that's an important part of the theory, right? Where, so I think that's, in a lot of ways, the debate culture is not really well suited for that, right? Because it's not really about, bringing together. It's more about that kind of struggle for dominance kind of view, But, all things have their contradictions. So maybe it has its place. Maybe it's a kind of entertainment. I don't know. But I have to say it's not mostly for me, Like, if I become a famous debate bro, it's not because I love the genre. It's because, whatever.
I can't wait one day for Dr. Asatar to like debate me, bros. To go around and demand people to debate you. I'm not going to debate you. I'm not going to debate you, Dr. Asatar.
I will sometimes bait reactionaries with that very sentence because they love it so much, so. Now the shoe's on the other foot, reactionaries.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you that it's good for entertainment. I gotta say that sometimes it's really fun to watch two people try to wreck each other like that. And debate culture did come from. Oh, we also have a debate in Vietnam, but we still do it in a very traditional way. For example, we have a reality show in Vietnam where kids in high school will. They will choose a topic and they will have about a week to 10 days to prepare for it. And then that kid on the day, he would go to the stage and talk about that topic that they already prepared for about 30 minutes. And then the audience will listen and then question that person. And then the person will answer. That is like a very basic original form of debate in Vietnam that we still maintain. The debate bros culture in Vietnam, virtually we don't have it. I cannot name any famous Vietnamese debate bros. So we lucky that we do not have those.
Did you see this comment here? I'm going to tell everyone that Luna destroyed Dr. Bair in this debate.
Oh, shit. This is how misinformation being spread.
This is how fake news spreads, you guys. Communists clash. They're supposed to cooperate, not conflict.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, there's another thing that before we finish our awesome interview today, I really want to ask you about. I see, for example, I am in a lot of big Facebook group of Vietnamese communists. And when we disagree with each other on some specific topic, because believe it or not, we Vietnamese communist socialists, we do disagree with each other a lot.
Right.
And we are not a monolith, So, for example, about topic A, and then this guy doesn't agree with that. And Comrade B is like, actually, no, I don't agree with you. And then, I read the whole, comment and reply thread on that topic. And I saw, a bunch of Vietnamese comrades jump in and talk to each other, disagree with each other, but in a very civilized way. It's like, okay, I disagree with you because of a list of A, B, C, D, D. And then the other comrade, I jump in okay, about the point A that you just mentioned, I agree, but point B, I do not agree. It's a very civilized way of disagreeing with each other. And actually, I read the whole thread and I learned a lot from both sides. But the same thing, I don't see that usually happen in the conversation between Western leftists. When they disagree with each other, they just jump in immediately and insult each other. And I'm sorry, but in a very uncivilized way. I saw no argument being brought up, no valid criticism or argument, just jumping and assuming things and insult each other. They totally not seeking truth. They are not seeking the truth, dislike Vietnamese comrades. When we disagree, we are trying to seeking the truth. And as the reader, I learned truth about it. But in the West, all I saw was people insult each other, calling each other slurs and names. and at the end of conversation, it just end like nasty, like in a very nasty way.
Yeah, because when things go that way, then it's
Why?
like you want to have the last word and whatever, right? I mean, Twitter can often be like this too. But I think you're right. I mean, we need to. This is part of the shift that we need to make. We need to make a shift towards let's seek the truth together, not oh, I have it and you don't, or whatever, right? Like, but I think if you have a group that functions that way, that's a good group. I'm not sure if that's a group that's open to everybody, but because sometimes closed groups are more like that, right? And open groups become more, whatever,
Nasty.
like Twitter, yeah, I mean, I'm known for educating people on Twitter, but I dunk on people on Twitter too. I try to do it in a nice way, but it's again, I think there's different formats and whatever. But I think you're right broadly that there are different cultures at play here, and it would be good if we could develop this kind of culture that's more collaborative. But I think that's hard to do under a capitalist system that emphasizes individuality so much and emphasizes competition so much, right? Like, it's a kind of how we treat each other. It has something to do with the material conditions. I mean, like one of the primary ideas from Marxism is that one, right? And how our economic system is organized has a big role to play in terms of how we treat each other.
Yeah. So usually when my reaction to this is like when I went to that Facebook Vietnamese communists, I would love reading the threads where people argue with each other because I know for sure that I will learn something new about this. But whenever I went on Twitter, I saw people arguing each other. It was like, oh no, what kind of insults they're gonna use? And the most common insult is the word tanky. We both got called tankies.
Yeah.
By those people. It's like they didn't give any valid argument at all. It's just like, you're tanky, you're canceled. Like, what do you mean by tanky? It's
my
they're
favorite
not
one.
seeking truth. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite one is Tanky McGulag. That's one that I was called. Or Dr. Gulag, I get called that one a lot.
Dr. Gulag.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny. Okay, that's
Dr. Stalin, Ass Eater Stalin. That was a classic one. So I don't know. People get creative with their insults. I always think if you insult somebody, you lose, right? I mean, that's my version of it, right? Because what are you showing with that? You're showing you have no argument. An insult is not an argument. Like maybe it's funny, but like, look, it's like funny is like salt on a meal. Like you got to have some substantive points, and then boom, throw an insult in there. That's funny, but you can't eat salt by itself, right? I mean, like that's not going to be satisfying. I mean, a lot of these are places where you entertain, right? Like Twitter is an entertainment place, so you don't look for like substantive stuff there. But still, I think you try to do your best. I mean, like a lot of us as communists, right? We are there to try to educate, if we can, right? Try to inform. Let's try to entertain each other a little bit if we can, right? Because life is short. But let's do it all if we can, right?
Yeah, but I like the name Dr. Gulag. I usually call myself Luna the Tanky, the Destroyer.
Nice.
So it's really great to finally have the chance to talk to you, Dr. Bair.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. I've been following you on Twitter for so long, and so happy that we have a chance to talk to each other. And I do hope in the future you can come back to my stream, and we can have like another conversation in the future.
I would enjoy that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it is really great for people in the chat. Like nearly 200 people are watching us right now. It's really awesome. And
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much all the raiders, and all the audience here. I hope that you would learn something from Dr. Bair in this conversation. And I hope that you can, put some theory into practice from X according to your ability to X according to your needs. That is a very famous quote. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And yeah. And do you have any final message that you want to say to the audience today?
These guys have really been lighting up the chat. I can't even keep up with it. I look at it occasionally, but there's some good comments there. I want to look at this later.
Yeah, sure. Oh, we have two donations. First from Bike Gator. Thank you for helping us understand how sensible and practical socialism and communism are. Thank you so much, and thank you for your donation. Sam Wise also just sent a donation. It's for 20. This is a dab from me. And it says, Sun Yat-sen approves of your rice farm, and so do I. Yeah, Sun Yat-sen is also a very famous Chinese comrade, and we did study him in school, and we did watch like a lot of Chinese TV shows about the life of Sun Yat-sen. Yeah, Dr. Asatar Bair, it's time to end our conversation. And do you have any final message you want to say it to the audience?
Well, thanks again so much for having me. And, guys, remember, communism will win. That is the driving force of history. And we need to believe in that. We cannot afford to become nihilistic. We cannot afford to become beaten down or to lose hope. We have to keep it alive, right? This is not just for us. This is for humanity. So that's my final message to y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to show you my tattoo. It's a tank. It's a red tank. So I own it. I freaking own it. Call me a tanky. So
gotta own it.
Yes.
Gotta own it.
Yes. Communism will win, and I own it. The tanky name. Okay. And yeah, I also want to send a very short message to the audience before we end. Is a famous quote from Fred Hampton. I would just paraphrase it. He said something that we all need to practice. We all will make mistakes, and making mistakes is good. Means that you're actually doing something to improve society, and mistakes will improve your theory, and then eventually you will achieve your true purpose of building a better society for the working class. And great solidarity to all comrades out there. And I hope that you will stay safe, stay strong, and communism will win. Bye, everybody.